Tonight finds us inside a medieval scriptorium, a quiet room of stone and candlelight, where a monk practices the slow art of calligraphy, copying scripture line by measured line onto vellum. The chapel door closes behind him with a sound that barely disturbs the silence, a soft settling of old oak into worn stone, the latch finding its place with a gentle click that seems to dissolve into the air before the echo can form. The monk stands for a moment in the corridor, feeling the shift from the chapel's vast, vaulted space into this narrower passage. The corridor is cool. The stone floor beneath his feet radiates a chill that rises through the worn leather of his sandals, through the wool of his stockings, settling into the soles with a familiar, grounding coldness that speaks of winter nights and buildings made to last centuries. He can feel the slight roughness of the flagstones, the surface smoothed by generations of footsteps, but still retaining the memory of the mason's chisel, the faint unevenness that his feet know without thought. His hands are tucked into the wide sleeves of his habit, fingertips meeting the opposite forearms, seeking warmth in the wool that has absorbed the heat of his body through the long hours of prayer. The fabric is thick and heavy, a deep brown that has faded in places to something softer, something that holds the weight of years. He can feel it settling around his shoulders, the familiar pull of it, the way it moves with him as he begins to walk, the hem brushing against his ankles with each forward step. The corridor stretches ahead, illuminated at intervals by small oil lamps set into niches carved into the stone walls. The flames are steady and low, barely moving in the still air, and the light they cast is amber and warm against the grey stone, creating pools of gentle glow that fade into shadow before the next lamp appears. His shadow moves beside him on the wall, elongated, silent, a dark companion that stretches and shortens as he passes each light source. His footsteps make almost no sound. The sandals are soft, the stride is measured and unhurried, and the stone seems to absorb what little noise there is, drawing it down and away so that only the faintest whisper remains. A soft scuff here, the brush of wool against wool there. The monastery is settling for the night. He can feel it in the quality of the silence, in the way the air seems to hold itself still, waiting. Somewhere far above, in the heights of the vaulted ceilings that crown the church, there might be the flutter of roosting birds, the shift of wings adjusting for sleep. Somewhere deeper in the building, in the kitchens or the cellars, there might be the last banked embers of cooking fires cooling in their hearths. But here, in this passage, there is only the stone and the lamplight and the slow procession of his own movement through the familiar space. The corridor turns, and he turns with it. The turn brings him to a narrower passage, one that slopes gently downward, the ceiling lower here, more intimate. The lamps are spaced further apart, and the shadows grow deeper, but his feet know the way. The air begins to change as he moves deeper into this wing of the monastery. There is a different quality to it here, drier, perhaps, or simply more enclosed. He can detect the faintest scent now, so subtle it might be imagined. Old parchment, beeswax, the smell of vellum that has aged for years in a quiet room. It is not a strong scent, not something that announces itself, but rather something that reveals itself slowly, gradually. The scriptorium door appears ahead, darker than the stone around it, set back slightly into a recessed archway. It is closed, and the wood is smooth and cool when his hand finds the iron ring that serves as a handle. He pulls, and the door swings inward with the softest creak, the voice of old hinges moving through their familiar arc, the sound barely louder than a breath. Stepping across the threshold, he feels the change immediately. The air is stiller here, more contained, and there is a warmth that has been held throughout the evening by the thick walls and the small brazier that burns low in the corner. The door closes behind him. The sound it makes is final but gentle, a soft settling that leaves the world outside in its own space. The silence is different now, complete, held. The scriptorium holds itself in darkness, patient and still, waiting. The small brazier in the corner glows with banked coals, offering warmth but little light, just the faintest orange shimmer that barely reaches beyond its iron frame. The monk stands just inside the door, letting his eyes adjust. He moves forward slowly, his sandals whispering against the wooden floorboards that cover the stone in this room, a concession to winter cold, to long hours of seated work. The boards are old and smooth, fitted closely together, and they give slightly under his weight with the softest creak. His desk stands against the far wall, beneath the single narrow window that during daylight hours admits a shaft of northern light, steady, clear, unchanging through the hours. Now the window is only darkness, the shutters left open to the night, and the desk is a darker shape against the wall, a suggestion of solid form waiting to be revealed. But first, there is light. He turns to the small shelf beside the door where the candles are kept, reaching without looking, his hand finding the clay dish and the thick tallow candle that sits ready in its holder. He lifts it carefully, feeling the weight of the wax, the smoothness of it under his fingers, and carries it to the brazier. Kneeling is slow, a matter of lowering himself with care, feeling the wool of his habit bunch and settle as his knees meet the floor. The brazier's coals pulse with their trapped heat, and he can feel the warmth radiating outward, touching his face, his hands. He tilts the candle, angling the wick down toward the coals, holding it steady until the heat finds the twisted fibers, until they begin to darken, to smoke, and then, with a small bloom that seems almost reluctant, to catch. The flame is tiny at first, barely more than a spark, but it grows as he holds it. He watches it for a moment, making certain it will hold, and then he rises, unfolding upward with the same careful slowness. The light spreads as he carries the candle to the desk, pushing back the darkness in a gentle wave. The wooden surface appears first, pale oak worn smooth by decades of use, marked here and there with faint ink stains that no amount of cleaning could remove. With the shallow grooves where previous scribes rested their rulers, with the patina that comes from hands touching the same places again and again, from arms resting in the same positions, from countless hours of quiet work. He sets the candle in its designated place at the desk's left corner, where a small brass holder is affixed to the wood. The candle slides into the socket with a soft scrape of wax on metal, and he presses it down firmly, making certain it is secure, that it will not tip or wobble. The light it casts is warm and golden, revealing the desk and the stool and the shallow shelves built into the wall above, where supplies are kept in careful order. The stool is simple, three-legged, carved from a single piece of oak and polished by use until the wood gleams dully in the candlelight. He draws it closer to the desk with one hand, the legs scraping softly against the floorboards, and positions it exactly where it should be, at the precise distance that allows his arms to rest comfortably, that lets his body settle into the work without strain. He does not sit yet. There is still preparation to be done. His hands move to the shelves, reaching for the objects stored there. First, the parchment, a single sheet already cut and prepared, the surface smoothed and scraped until it is pale and even, until it will accept ink without bleeding or feathering. He lifts it carefully and lays it on the desk, positioning it squarely, making certain it lies flat. Then the weights, 2 small stones wrapped in leather, smooth and heavy enough to hold the parchment in place without creasing or tearing. He sets them at the top corners, pressing them down gently, and the parchment becomes fixed, ready, waiting. The quill comes next, selected from the small bundle of prepared feathers that stand in a clay jar. Goose quills, each one carefully cut and hardened, the barbs stripped away to leave only the shaft and the small tuft at the end that serves as a grip. His fingers test the nib, feeling for sharpness, for the correct angle. Finding it satisfactory, he lays it beside the parchment. The inkhorn is taken down from its hook, a small vessel carved from cow horn, stoppered with cork, containing the oak gall ink that has been mixed and settled and is ready for use. He sets it within easy reach, just beyond the parchment's edge, where it will not spill if accidentally touched. Beside it, he places the penknife, a small blade with a worn wooden handle used for scraping errors, for resharpening the quill's nib as it dulls with use. And finally, the ruler, a thin strip of wood marked with careful lines, edges worn smooth from guiding countless strokes of pen across countless pages. Everything is in its place now, arranged with the logic of long practice. The monk lowers himself onto the stool, feeling his body settle into the familiar position. Back straight, but not rigid, arms resting lightly on the desk's edge, hands folded loosely before him. The room is warm now, still and ready. The tools are laid out. The parchment waits, clean and pale. The night presses against the shutterless window, held at bay by the small circle of light. Everything is prepared. Everything is as it should be. The monk sits in the quiet, in the warmth, in the gentle glow, and the scriptorium holds him with the patience of stone and wood, and years of nights just like this one. He reaches for the sheet of parchment and his fingers trace the edges, checking for evenness, for any rough spots where the cutting was less than perfect, for the quality of the preparation. The surface is smooth, cool, and slightly waxy from the treatments that transform hide into something that will accept ink without resistance or spreading. But smooth is not enough. There is always refinement to be done, always the gentle work of making the surface even better. He lifts a small piece of pumice from the shallow wooden box at the desk's edge, feeling its familiar weight, its porous lightness that seems at odds with stone. It is pale grey, worn into a rounded shape by years of use, fitting comfortably into his palm. He begins to rub the parchment with the pumice, using small circular motions, applying almost no pressure, just enough for the stone to make contact, to polish the surface, to remove any last traces of unevenness or residue. The sound is soft, like sand shifting, like fabric brushing against fabric. The pumice moves in slow circles across the parchment, overlapping, covering every part of the surface with patient thoroughness. His hand follows the same pattern it always follows, starting at the top left corner, working across, then down, methodical and unhurried. The candlelight catches the faint dust that rises from the work, tiny particles floating in the still air like motes suspended in amber. He can feel the texture changing, becoming smoother, more refined, and when he has covered the entire sheet, he sets the stone aside and brushes the parchment clean. Now he takes up the thin wooden ruler, holding it firmly at both ends, and positions it across the top of the sheet, just below where the first line of text will begin. The ruler's edge is straight and true, and he aligns it carefully, making certain it is parallel to the top edge of the parchment, that the distance is exact. With his left hand holding the ruler in place, he reaches for the lead point, a thin stylus of soft metal that will mark the parchment without tearing it, leaving lines visible enough to guide the pen, but faint enough to disappear beneath the ink. The point is cool between his fingers, and he brings it to the parchment surface, touching it lightly to the edge of the ruler, then drawing it across in one smooth, continuous motion. The stylus glides along the ruler's edge, leaving behind a thin silver line that catches the candlelight just slightly. The sound is a whisper of metal on parchment, a soft friction that barely disturbs the quiet. He lifts the stylus at the end of the stroke, then moves the ruler down the precise distance to the next line, aligning it again with care, and draws another line, and another, working his way down the page in measured increments. The ruling takes time. Each line must be straight, must be evenly spaced, must be positioned correctly so that the text will sit properly on the page, so that the margins will be uniform and the whole will be pleasing to the eye. But there is no hurry. The lines appear one after another, silver threads across the pale parchment, creating a structure, creating order, creating the framework within which the words will live. When the ruling is complete, he examines the page, tilting it slightly to catch the light, making certain every line is visible, that none have been missed or drawn too faintly. The lines are there, regular and even, waiting. Now the ink. He reaches for the small horn vessel and works the cork free with a gentle twisting motion, feeling it release with a soft pop. It releases a scent into the air, earthy and slightly metallic, the smell of oak galls and iron salts and gum arabic, of ingredients carefully mixed and aged until they achieve the proper consistency, the proper darkness. He sets the open horn down carefully and takes up the quill. The shaft is pale and smooth, and he examines the nib, checking the cut, making certain the slit is centered, that the point is sharp enough for fine work. It looks good, but he tests it anyway, dipping it into the ink just barely, letting the liquid wick up into the hollow of the shaft, then touching it to a scrap of parchment kept for this purpose. The ink flows from the nib in a thin, dark line, not too thick, not too thin, just right. The quill is ready, the ink is right, the parchment is ruled and waiting. He dips the quill properly now, letting it draw up the ink, and then he brings it to the parchment, to the first line, to the place where the first letter will begin. The pen touches the surface and the ink flows, dark and wet, forming the first stroke. His hand moves with practiced certainty, creating the shape of the letter with a series of strokes. Thick lines where pressure is applied, thin lines where the nib barely touches, curves and verticals and the small decorative elements that distinguish one letter form from another. The scratch of the quill is steady, rhythmic, a sound that fills the quiet without disturbing it. The first letter is completed, and he moves to the second, dipping the quill again when the ink runs low, wiping the excess against the rim of the horn, bringing the nib back to the parchment. Letter follows letter, each one formed with care, each one occupying its proper space between the ruled lines. The words appear slowly, emerging from the blank surface like something being revealed rather than created. His hand knows this work. The movements do not need conscious thought, the body remembering the angles, the pressure, the rhythm that produces letters of consistent size and weight and spacing. The quill moves, the ink flows, the words take shape. When a word is complete, there is a small pause, just the briefest moment of assessment before moving on to the next. The spacing between words must be even, must allow the eye to separate them without difficulty. He positions the nib, begins the next word, the next series of letters, the next flow of dark ink onto pale parchment. The candle burns steady and constant. The wax melts and pools at the base of the wick, then hardens again as it flows down the candle's side, creating long drips that solidify into frozen waterfalls of pale tallow. The light it casts does not change, does not waver beyond the smallest flickering that comes from air moving with his breath, with the small motions of his work. Line by line, the text grows. The first line is finished, and he moves to the second, the ink flowing again into letters and words. The second line is like the first, the same careful formation, the same measured pace, the same attention to spacing and weight and form. The third line begins, the fourth. His hand moves in its steady rhythm, and the soft scratch of the quill becomes part of the room's stillness, becomes a sound that defines the quiet rather than breaking it. The candlelight remains constant. The warmth from the brazier continues to fill the space, making the scriptorium a place where fingers remain nimble, where ink flows freely, where work can continue through the long hours of the night. When the quill begins to dull, the lines growing less crisp, the strokes requiring more pressure, he sets it down and takes up the penknife. The blade meets the nib at the proper angle, and he shaves away a thin curl of quill, exposing fresh material, resharpening the point. Small pale shavings fall onto the desk, and he brushes them aside with the edge of his hand before testing the newly sharpened nib on the scrap of parchment. The line it makes is clean and dark. The quill is ready again. The work continues. Line follows line, word follows word, letter follows letter. The page fills slowly, the ruled lines disappearing beneath the text. The blank spaces at the top and sides creating margins that frame the words, that give them room to exist, to be read, to serve their purpose. There are moments when he pauses, not from uncertainty or fatigue, but simply to rest the hand, to let the fingers relax for a moment before continuing. These pauses are brief, lasting only long enough to take a slow breath, to shift his weight slightly on the stool, to glance at what has been completed and what remains. The ink in the horn lowers gradually as he works, the level dropping each time the quill is dipped. He can gauge how much remains, but there is no concern. There is enough for the work at hand, and when it is gone, there will be more. There is always more. The half page is reached, then passed. The letters continue their march down the ruled lines, orderly and even, creating text that will be read by others in other times, that will serve purposes beyond this quiet room, beyond this single night of careful work. 3/4 of the page is filled now. The bottom margin draws closer, the space for words diminishing as the text accumulates. The work has taken on its own momentum, the rhythm so established that the hand seems to move on its own, guided by years of practice, by muscles that know the motions without needing instruction. The final line begins. The quill moves along its ruled path, forming the last words of the page, carrying the text to its natural stopping point. The final letter is made, the final stroke completed, and he lifts the quill from the parchment, holding it poised above the surface for a moment before setting it in its rest. The page is finished. Not the work. There are more pages waiting, more parchment to be prepared and ruled and filled. But this page is complete. He sits back slightly, easing the tension in his shoulders, and looks at what has been accomplished. The text is even, the spacing consistent, the letters properly formed. It is good work. The page needs time for the ink to dry fully, to set into the parchment's fibers, to become permanent. The weighted corners hold it in place, and it rests there on the desk, the candlelight playing across its surface, catching the wetness of the most recent lines, where the ink still gleams slightly before it dulls into matte darkness. The monk flexes his fingers slowly, feeling the slight stiffness that comes from holding the quill, from maintaining the precise control required for this work. The night continues around him. The candle burns down by small increments. The scriptorium remains warm and still and quiet, a space held apart from time, a place where work unfolds at its own pace, where nothing is rushed, where everything is done with care. The monk rests his hands in his lap, palms upward, and allows himself this small pause. The completed page waits. The next page waits. The ink and quill and parchment wait. Everything waits, patient and ready for the work to resume when he is ready to continue. Warmed by the brazier, the dry air of the scriptorium gradually roughens the back of his throat. a familiar discomfort he notices without urgency, knowing it comes each night. His eyes move to the small shelf just within reach. A simple clay flask sits there, stoppered with a wooden plug. Next to it rests a wooden cup, small and plain, its interior darkened by years of use. He reaches for the flask first, his fingers feeling the coolness of the clay, the slight roughness of its surface. As he lifts it, he can hear the soft slosh of wine and water mixed together. He works the stopper free with a gentle twisting motion, feeling the seal break with the smallest sound. He sets it on the desk, then reaches for the wooden cup, holding it in his left hand, while his right tilts the flask above it. The liquid pours in a thin stream, dark in the candlelight. Not the deep red of pure wine, but something paler, more translucent, the color of rust or autumn leaves seen through water. It falls into the cup with a soft trickling sound. When the proper amount has been poured, he rights the flask and sets it down, then retrieves the stopper and presses it back into place. The cup is lifted to his lips slowly, both hands rising together, the wood cool against his fingertips. He can smell it now, the faint tartness of wine mingled with water. Nothing strong, nothing that would cloud the mind or dull the hand. Just the mild scent of grapes that have been crushed and fermented and then made gentle by dilution. The first sip is small. The liquid is cool but not cold. It touches his tongue and the taste is immediate but subtle. Slightly sweet, slightly sour, carrying enough of the wine's character to be something other than plain water. To be something that offers a small comfort, a small pleasure. He swallows, feeling the liquid slide down his throat, feeling the dryness ease as it passes. The sensation is immediate and satisfying, a small relief that spreads warmth as it descends. Another sip, larger this time, more confident. The warmth continues to build, subtle but present, reaching into places that had grown slightly chilled without him fully noticing. The center of his chest, the core of his body, where the warmth matters most. After he has satisfied his thirst, he sets the empty cup back on the shelf, placing it exactly where it was, next to the flask. His hands are slightly warmer now. He flexes them once, slowly, feeling the ease in the joints, the readiness returning. The ritual is complete. Everything is as it should be. He rests his hands on the desk's edge, palms down, feeling the smooth wood beneath them, the solidity that will support the work when it resumes. The candle burns beside him, unchanged. The completed page still rests between its weights, the ink now fully dry. The quill waits in its rest, the inkhorn sits open and ready. The next sheet of parchment lies prepared on the small stack at the desk's far corner. The scriptorium holds him in its warmth, in its stillness, in its patient expectation. The night continues its slow passage, unmarked by anything but the work itself. He is ready. The pause has served its purpose, and now there is only the gentle return to the quill, to the ink, to the ruled lines waiting to be filled with letters. He completes one more line, the final letter formed with the same care as all the others before it, and then lifts the nib from the parchment and holds it there, suspended for a breath longer than usual. The ink at the tip glistens wetly in the candlelight. He lowers the quill to its rest, the shaft settling into the worn groove with a soft touch of wood on wood. He reaches for the inkhorn, his movements unhurried, and slides the wooden stopper into the neck of the horn with gentle pressure, sealing the opening, containing the dark liquid within. The parchment before him holds the night's work. Lines of text, even and dark, the ruled guides beneath them barely visible now. He lifts the leather-wrapped stones from the corners, setting them aside. The parchment lies flat without them, simply resting where it has been all evening. He does not move it yet. There is no need. It can remain here, on the desk, among the other tools. Everything can remain. His hands come to rest in his lap, folded loosely, no longer holding, no longer forming, no longer guiding. They simply exist, warm and still, the slight stiffness from the work present, but not uncomfortable. The fingers curve naturally, at ease. The candle continues its burning, steady and constant. The flame does not flicker. The wax melts and flows and hardens in its patient rhythm. The light remains unchanged, casting the same warm glow across the desk, across the completed page, across the monk's hands in their stillness. His breathing has slowed. The rhythm of it is quiet, barely audible, just the soft passage of air. In, out. Each breath is the same as the one before. Nothing changes. Nothing needs to. The brazier in the corner holds its warmth, the coals glowing faintly orange in their bed of ash. The heat continues to rise, to fill the room, to keep the stone walls from pressing their cold inward. The air remains gentle, unchanged. Somewhere in the monastery, far beyond this room, there might be the distant sound of a door closing, or footsteps in a corridor, or the wind moving against shutters. But here in the scriptorium, these sounds do not reach. Here there is only the immediate quiet, the stillness of stone and wood and air that has settled into perfect calm. The monk's eyes rest on the candle flame, simply resting there, letting the light exist without asking anything of it. The flame burns. His eyes receive it. Nothing more is required. His shoulders have dropped, the weight of them releasing downward, no longer held in the posture of work. His spine remains upright, but without effort, supported by habit, by the body's knowledge of how to sit, how to be. The night continues around the monastery. Hours have passed. Time moves but does not announce itself. The darkness beyond the window remains complete. The stars follow their slow arc across the sky unseen. The desk holds the tools. The tools rest where they have been placed. The parchment lies flat, its surface covered with careful letters. The candle burns lower, its height diminishing by increments too small to notice in any single moment. Everything remains as it is. The warmth, the stillness, the soft darkness beyond the small circle of light. The monk sits in the quiet, and the quiet holds him. And the scriptorium breathes its patient breath around them both. The stone and the wood and the flame and the man, all together in the gentleness of the hour, in the long and unbroken stillness of the night. The candle flame burns steady in the darkness, and the light it gives continues, soft and golden and still.